Richard and I sat in total silence for what felt like hours, trying to assimilate and absorb something so gut-wrenchingly terrible that it was almost beyond acceptance. Amy, the most vibrant and alive person I'd ever known, had turned her own philosophy of living each day as though it was your last into a prophecy. The news had clearly shocked even the hospital staff, for I swear we were treated differently after it had broken. It was there when the nurse who came to take my blood pressure had given my hand a long, hard squeeze after removing the cuff from my arm. It was even evident with the registrar on morning rounds, who had finally told me I could go home. He had patted my shoulder in a slightly awkward and uncomfortable way, and although nothing had been said, there had been a look of sympathy and condolence on his face, which I had a feeling I was going to be seeing quite a lot of in the days to come. After the hospital team left my room, Richard had helped me to get changed out of the starchy gown they'd put me into, and back into my suddenly highly inappropriate short party dress. I cringed when I felt the fabric brush against my bare skin, because there were several dark, encrusted stains splattered on it, which I knew had to be blood. I just didn't know whose. Mine? Jack's? Or was it Amy's? What difference did it make? It was going to go straight in the bin the moment I got home. To save time, Richard volunteered to go to the hospital pharmacy and fill the prescription for the painkillers I'd been given. "I won't be long," he promised, kissing me briefly below the large white bandage on my forehead. "Will you be all right while I'm gone?" I shook my head sadly, and all he could do was nod back in understanding. It felt like nothing and none of us were going to be all right ever again. We both knew that. And I strongly suspected that the moment we left the confines of the hospital, it was going to get a whole lot worse. A light knock on the door was followed by a young nurse who opened it just wide enough to slide her head through the opening. I assumed she was there to tell me the cab we'd ordered had arrived, but she surprised me instead with the words, "You have a visitor, Miss Marshall. It's not our regular visiting hours, but given the special circumstances..." There it was again, that VIP treatment reserved for those whose tragedies transcended the usual. I didn't want to be a member of this club. The nurse stood to one side to allow my visitor to enter the room. Jack stood for just one moment without saying anything. Then his first words were my undoing. "Emma, I am so sorry." I tried very hard not to lose it. I nodded my head, acknowledging his sympathetic words, but I could already feel my lip beginning to tremble, like an opera singer about to sing an aria. With a sound that started like a hiccup and ended like a dog's yelp, I was once again being held in his arms, while the tears, which hadn't fallen when Richard had been there, finally found the crack in the dam. I'm actually not much of a crier. I never have been. So it was even more astounding that this American stranger, who I'd known less than 12 hours, had now comforted me in his arms while I wept like a child more often than my fiancé had done in the last 12 years. I didn't hear Richard enter the room, even though I was starting to regain control by then. So the first I knew that we weren't alone was Richard's rather cool inquiry, "Emma?" Jack looked up, but kept his arms firmly around me. His hold was innocent and intended only to comfort, but I saw a challenging light spark in his golden brown eyes at Richard's tone. This was definitely something I didn't need right then. I struggled out of Jack's embrace, and his arms instantly fell from around me. He extended his hand to Richard. "Jack Monroe," he announced. "I'm sorry we never got a chance to be formally introduced last night." Richard took a moment too long in raising his hand to shake Jack's. Then, just before the situation tipped from slightly discourteous to downright rude, he placed his palm against